Alright, we're going to start this Funray build. Pretty excited about it. We're going to start with the wings here, and the first thing I'm going to do is open up the servo bays for our high-tech wing servos that Carlton gave us. And these servos come with their own plastic frame, so that's just perfect. So I basically just made my marks the exact same size as the frame that came with the servos. So I'm going to go ahead and cut these out. Progress being made here. I have cut out the, or widened or opened up the servo openings. And I also cut the pass-through and that subspar for the linkage. And if we look at the flap here, I cut a slot in there for the control horn. And I found these fiberglass horns that I had laying around. And they're pretty close to about the size I need, so I'm just going to go ahead and use these. I'll have to drill this hole a little bit to get a clevis in there. But we're going to epoxy these in to the flap. And then for the aileron, I'm thinking I'm actually going to use kind of an old school threaded brass horn that's going to stick up here. Then the linkage will just be outside. I made some balsa wood blocks for the servo frames for the ailerons here, and that just raises the servo up off the bed, and it ends up looking like this. So the servo is nice and high, so we can use a short arm and reach the horns here. And for the horns, I'm just going to use these brass horns here. They're kind of long. I wish they were a little bit longer, but I think it'll be okay. And I've just drilled holes into the ailerons, and I've put some wax on the threads of the horns, and I'm going to push these through and come in from this side and put a bunch of epoxy on there. Should be just fine. These guys are going to get glued in. I'm going to scuff the skins up and clean it out with some alcohol. And then for the flaps, pretty straightforward installation there. Just going to glue that straight to the skin. I have to put some plastic in between the servo and the tray to protect the servo. And hopefully we'll be able to glue that fiberglass horn in there as well. The brass horns epoxied in. There's a ton of epoxy underneath there. And then the balsa blocks with the servo frames are also epoxied in. We have some weights holding it down, and we'll let this cure overnight, and then hopefully tomorrow we'll tackle getting the horn in here and gluing these frames in place. I'll show you the progress on the Funray. I got the aileron horns glued in. That came out really well. Aileron trays on those balsa blocks are glued in. Let me show you the splooge, epoxy and cabosil holding that horn down. And I did wax the threads, so they should come out if I need to get them out. And then I went a little nuts and decided to try to get up travel on the flaps. So you can see I cut that channel. It's about a 4mm channel that I cut out, and the next big step is making the wipers, epoxy wipers. So here's the setup for making the wipers. I got some clear tape, and it's doubled up on this side. You can see it's kind of folded under the skin right now temporarily. And I glued some popsicle sticks or taped them in there just to get some extra gap. And so what we're going to do is pull this tape out and apply epoxy on the back side, and then put it back in and kind of set it up and let the epoxy cure. Here's the pro setup. A little baggie with epoxy and cabosil. And then here's the epoxy applied on the tape from this side. Now we're going to tuck this in to get a nice arc. And that's kind of what it's going to look like. So I'm just going to let both these wings sit here, propped up against this box overnight. We'll see how she comes out. Okay, so the last little bit of work I'm going to do for today, or I already did I should say, is went crazy again, and I obviously cut this servo, rudder servo cutout much bigger. Initially I was just going to mount it in like this, but I'm going to go ahead and just drop it in flat, and then we'll run some kind of vinyl or something over that hole. That's because it just wasn't really working out too well with getting a really long arm in here, and the rudder doesn't really have a ton of travel, so I think it would just be better if I had a horn sort of internal here, because it's really wide at the base. There's plenty of room for it, so that's the plan. I did get these pin style hinges, MP jet hinges installed. They were already, the holes were already cut out. I had to widen them up a little bit. That's no big deal. So yeah, the rudder doesn't get a ton of travel, and I did relieve the bottom of the fuse here to get as much as I could, because it was basically hitting, it was binding here on this part of the rudder. So I got a little more travel making those reliefs. So for the rudder and the rudder servo, the next thing to do is get a horn in here. I'm probably going to run a little fiberglass horn with a clevis, or two clevises, clevis at the servo. And we're going to put a really short servo arm on this guy because we just don't need full travel in the servo because the rudder doesn't move all that much. Well, here's what our wipers look like after the epoxy is cured. Looks kind of messy, right? But we will go ahead and pull back the tape and see if we get a good release. Trying to do this one-handed, so bear with me. There we go. Needs a little cleanup here. So after this, basically I just trim a straight line. I'll show you what that looks like with the other wing. So here's a finished wiper on the other wing. See, we got a nice clean gap there, and then we get our up travel, and that's what the wiper looks like. Pretty cool. Got around to getting the flap servos installed, or the trays glued in. So that's curing right now, and I did put the fiberglass horns in the flap surfaces. I'll show you that after the resin is dried, but both these wings are curing. And then over to the fuse, I've gone with another fiberglass horn for the rudder. See that right there? That's just stuck in there currently, so that's going to get epoxied in like that. And I got to make sure that it fits under the skin here so it doesn't hit when the rudder's deflected. And obviously I cut that hole out there for the linkage to hook up to that horn. And I told you before, the servo's going in here, completely laying on its side instead of sticking up. And we got the hinges ready to go. They're ready to be epoxied in. So it's looking pretty good. Flap servos are installed now. The epoxy's fully cured. Got them all screwed down. I took that plastic out that was protecting the servo. I have 3mm threaded rod and 3mm clevises here. at the servo and a really short horn. I actually had to drill my own hole on the arm that came with the high-tech servo to get a shorter horn. Pretty happy with the way this looks on top. It's looking really clean with that wiper. And let me show you what this looks like in here. There's the fiberglass horn and the clevis. Looking pretty good. Over on the rudder here, we have another fiberglass horn, epoxied in, pretty solid. And next thing to do is glue the rudder hinges in place, but I'm still working on mounting that servo in here. So I gotta do that first before I glue the hinges, and I gotta obviously make up a linkage rod for that. Let's take a look at the rudder setup I got going on here. We got linkage on the horn that we epoxied in, and I made a little balsa block for the servo, and I actually kind of recessed it so the servo fits, and this is just going to be tape the servo up and glue it in kind of deal. It is what it is, and the block is to get it off this back wall because it's so deep, and raise it up to try to keep this linkage somewhat in line with the arm. And I'm going to go with this servo arm and the shortest hole there that I drilled already for the clevis. So that's going to be our arm. So the next thing to do is I'm going to wrap some packing tape around this and use some 15, maybe 5-minute epoxy on that, and I might also glue the hinges into the rudder as well. Well, I test fit everything here. The servo is in place. Linkage is all hooked up. Hinges are in. They're not glued into the fuse yet, but you know, it's all working pretty good. I don't get a ton of rudder travel, but that's okay. So I'm just going to go ahead and get everything buttoned up here, and that's going to entail epoxying the servo down, or the balsa wood block. So we're going to scuff the fuse up a little bit, and then we're going to get some epoxy in the hinges on the fuse side and just kind of do everything in one shot. Okay, so the rudder linkage and servo installation is basically done. See, the servo is glued into this balsa block, wrapped in tape, all that. And this is the throw we're getting. That's max that direction, and max that direction. So it's not a ton, but it's, you know, I think it's going to be good enough. So that's fine. The hinges are glued in, all that stuff. And then moving on to the elevators, I kind of started this side already. And you can see that we have a servo in there. Same thing here, I just wrapped it in tape. I trimmed the arms off and wrapped the servo in tape. And I put a balsa shim underneath, a very small one, so it's kind of level with the surface. See that right there? And then another thing I've done is I've trimmed a little off the moving part of the elevator to get more down throw. So that's how much we're getting here. And this other side I haven't cut yet, and it's considerably less. So I'll trim this guy too. So I'm going to move forward with this. I'm going to have to open this up a little bit to fit the servo. And I made a slot there so the arm gets clearance. So those are things I have to do. I'm going to have to trim the arms off this and get that wrapped in tape and prep the horn. And then for the control horns that'll get epoxied into the elevators, I think I'm just going to cut some of this fiberglass plate and kind of make my own. So I basically started rough sketching that here, and we'll polish those up. But so yeah, I'm going to move forward with trying to get this guy to the same spot that this guy's in. So here's what the servo looks like. It's wrapped in tape, and I have this little balsa shim glued to the bottom and sanded so that when I put it in here it's fairly flush. And I've scuffed this up a little bit, so that's ready to get some epoxy to hold this servo down. So we could go ahead and just glue that in. I have to shorten this wire up. I shortened this guy up quite a bit. You can see this length versus this length. Yeah. So we'll go ahead and do that, and then we'll move on to cutting out those fiberglass control horns. Got both the elevators kind of at the same point now, and I've fabbed up my control horns here out of that fiberglass plate, and they're just going to get slotted into these slots I cut out in the elevators, and then they'll get epoxied in like this. I think they'll work out pretty well, so I'm going to go ahead and mix up some epoxy and get these glued in. Okay, so we got these horns epoxied in here. As you can see, both of them. And we'll just let this cure overnight. And I think I'm going to wrap up this first build video right here, because it's getting pretty long and we've accomplished a lot. We've got all the servos and controls in the wing. We hooked up the rudder servo and the controls, the rudder hinges. Got all that working, and we basically have the elevators almost done. The only thing left to do is put a linkage across here, shorten up this wire, put covers across, and I might put gap seal in there or maybe gap seal tape, I don't know, depending on how motivated I am. But it's a pretty long video, so we'll just wrap this one up here, and on the next one maybe we'll move into, you know, putting the motor in and some of the gear that goes into the fuselage and some other things like that. So hope you guys enjoyed, and look forward to seeing you in the next one.